Hey Cam, thank you so much for coming on today. I'm really excited to get to chat with you.
Hey Cora, it's my pleasure to be with you.
So obviously you're at home now in Brighton, having kind of a break from your rather hectic lifestyle before, and we're going to touch upon that because I know a lot of people will be interested to see how you've gone from such a kind of not crazy lifestyle, but a very fast-paced lifestyle to like settling in to the slowness
Yeah.
of life, which I think is something that is really intrinsic to sustainability. But before we get going, I just wanted to kind of ask you to introduce yourself a little bit, and also, you come from quite a fashion legacy. Your family owns the Mulberry brand, and also sort of how you kind of navigated fashion to go into such a niche of sustainable production. So I'm going to hand it over to you to just give us all a bit of an introduction and a little bit about that path journey, I guess.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, it's certainly been a journey. So yeah, I'm Cameron Saul, aka Cam, and I am the co-founder of Bottletop and the Bottletop Foundation, and I am one of the co-creators of our Together Band campaign, which is a global campaign with the United Nations Foundation and with UN Environment and UBS, Global Citizen, and some other great partners, using creativity and culture to drive mass engagement in the Sustainable Development Goals, or the global goals, as they're also known, and is commonly understood to be our route map for a healthy planet. So yeah, our work with Bottletop has been an 18-year journey that started back in 2002.
God, has it been
And so yeah, I'm 38, and I started it when I was 20. So it's been my entire adult life, I guess. And it still feels like we're only just getting started. So yeah, I don't know if that's a good thing or a really bad thing. Like I made the worst choice or the best choice, but
I
either way,
feel
I'm still,
like all the
chugging.
time. I think it means that you're able to evolve as a company when you always kind of feel like you're starting a little bit. Like, I think actually the problem with like the bigger companies sometimes is that they don't feel like they're just starting, so therefore they're so stuck in their ways they're not really evolving.
Yeah, I think for me it's all about the kind of the passion and the mission, and whether that remains true, for us as individuals and for us as an organization. And it does. We've always had a very clearly defined purpose as an organization to empower people and planet. The empowering of people has always been in the form of livelihood creation and economic empowerment of artisans in developing parts of the world, as well as young people with health education through our foundation. And the planet part is really about the way that we design and the way that we create, and doing that in a way that uses waste and sustainably sourced materials wherever possible. So I think that mission began at the point that we began the organization back in 2002, and it's still absolutely the same today, 18 years later. I think it was on the 24th of June 2002 that we launched the original campaign. So it's pretty much 18 years, and so I think that's what keeps it new and fresh for me, is actually, again, the why, not the how, but the why that sits behind the organization and what we do, and yeah, why we do it.
Yeah. So I think like going back to kind of when you were in your, I guess it would be your late teens, given that you started when you were 20, I know that you kind of, you've done some traveling that really impacted you. I think people that start, businesses that are so sustainably and ethically minded, I think there's always like a root, or there was something in their lives that kind of caused them to open their eyes to the greater world. So I'd love to kind of have you tell us a bit about, what that journey or that moment was for you that made you think, like, here I have opportunity, I have ability, I have intellect, I'm going to use that for something good. I'm going to do something with that to either help people or, whatever your motivation really was.
Yeah. So I think, I mean, I was incredibly lucky, growing up with a very close family in Somerset in the UK. You know, very fortunate to be able to travel a lot as kids. I've got 2 bros, and you know, we you know, used to spend family holidays in, you know, visiting different friends of mum and dad's in different parts of the world. But when I reached 18, you know, I took a year out and decided to go and volunteer in East Africa, in Uganda. And so it was really the first time that I had put myself seriously outside of my comfort zone, and was putting myself in a part of the world, you know, rural Africa, which was completely uncharted territory for me. It's not, you know, we'd certainly not visited sub-Saharan African countries as a family, and let alone in a rural context. And so that was a huge eye-opener for me, and it was the most beautiful and powerful experience that I had had, and got to really, you know, build relationships over a 9-month period that I was living in a very remote village up in the mountains close to the Kenyan border, with those people, you know. And I was the first white dude that the majority of them had ever seen, and, you know, I was I think definitely a curiosity, if nothing else. And I think the attendance at the secondary school like quadrupled when they heard that this Mzungu was showing up to teach some classes, because they're like, okay, we need to see this freak show. And so off we went. And so, yeah, after 9 months of teaching sexual and reproductive health education, sanitation and hygiene, and particularly health oriented stuff with those kids, I was really inspired by them, and wanted to find ways to support that kind of work.
Okay. And so you came back to the UK, and how did Bottletop kind of, you know, because obviously Bottletop, I feel like the origins are much more in South America, but how did that sort of translate into your next phase of doing something?
So it came directly from Uganda, in that I came across this gorgeous little sort of pop art African bag design that was made locally from the recycled tops from glass bottles. And I was just like, that's super cool. Like, I know people would love that. And so brought it back to the UK, and my obviously family background was with Mulberry, and I'd spent, you know, much of my youth growing up working within the business in different, you know, in pretty much every corner of the business. And I stepped in to help my dad out. At the time was wholesaling the women's accessory collection, and while I was doing that, I showed him some of these bag samples that I brought back from Uganda, and, you know, he loved them, and the design team loved them, and we said, okay, how could we use this design to raise funds for the NGO that I'd been volunteering for. And so we first needed to edit the design. You know, it was a very humble, very eclectic metal African bag, and so we added leather that were waste offcuts from the factory floor at Mulberry. We kind of finished it at the level that Mulberry, you know, finishes their designs, which is obviously very high quality, and made it something which was effectively this really beautiful hybrid of African and European design, but all made from waste. As I say, the leather was from the factory floor, so we wanted to reflect that on our side of the design equation as well. And we then wrapped a campaign around it. We did a photo series with David Bailey and various amazing kind of stars or icons, from Bob Geldof to Nena Cherry. And we launched it with British Vogue, and it became Mulberry's best-selling bag globally. And we raised a lot of money for the NGO that I've been working with in Uganda. But it really created a blueprint, in the sense that it was like, wow, this actually works. This model works. And maybe it's just one design, but this model works in the sense of beautiful craftsmanship, done in a way that was creating livelihoods for the team of artisans that we assembled in Nairobi, making the wire frames of the bags from the recycled tops. with the leather being added in Europe and then selling the bags to raise money for health education programs back in East Africa. So it was like this virtuous cycle of positive impact on people and planet. And we just said, well, that's it. That's the blueprint. You know, doesn't need to be any more complex than that. Let's just do that, but build the Bottletop brand around those values. And so that's how it began.
So this is really interesting to me because you were doing this in 2002 and you're talking about things like using waste offcuts and, you know, utilizing waste in the form of glass bottle tops at the time, you know. So were you aware of sustainability back in those days? Because I think back at 2002 and I feel like most of us were just, you know, I wasn't there yet. And how, you know, how has this journey into like sustainability as such as what we know today and what you're working on with Together Band in the UN, which obviously we'll discuss more, you know, was that something that was just like at the fringe for you, or did you inherently know that it was an issue?
No, it wasn't a kind of an intellectual take on it. It was a product and design led thing. You know, it was about, that's an amazing product, and wow, look at the fact that, you know, people are innovating with what they have, which is the detritus of nothing, you know, in East Africa, and yet they're able to design and create beautiful things. And so it came from, you know, the strength of the design, from, you know, the fact that the materials were waste materials was just beautifully symbolic, and almost poetic about the fact that of course it was made from waste because they had nothing else to create with. And so I love the fact that, you know, that blueprint and that business model for us, which was about a sustainable business model, was completely born out of, you know, African craftsmanship, and their way of designing in those days, which was with what they had, which was waste. So for me, that was really powerful. And what we realized, and again, you know, it was all quite avant-garde at the time because it wasn't perceived cool to be designing with waste. It was actually quite risky because, you know, that didn't add marketing value, you know, in the way that today, if you're not designing with waste or with innovative materials, you're kind of, you know, why are you not? Back then it was all about, you know, it was when luxury fashion was in its heyday of luxe, you know, it was all about big and brash and sexy and expensive and you know, glamour in its heyday. And so for us to be launching a campaign with bags made from waste, you know, from Africa, made it was even more obvious to us that the design had to be awesome. It had to be impeccable. You know, the quality had to be nailed, and we had to create, you know, a sexy campaign around it. You know, we had to tell the story in a captivating way. And I remember we also, as well as the David Bailey campaign, the campaign that we shot for the windows in the Mulberry Bond Street flagship store were with a girl called Yinka, who was the first, one of the first people to effectively stand up and say, I'm HIV positive, from Nigeria. And she was a beautiful, beautiful woman. And so we invited her to shoot her for this campaign, which we did. And, you know, with the tagline, I think, bold, beautiful, battling with HIV/AIDS. And it was really, really powerful. And I always remember everybody at Mulberry, it was like, wow, you know, I remember they all felt that it was the most powerful window they'd ever seen or had, you know, at Mulberry. And I think that was where I also realized that the power of coupling beautiful, sustainable product design with storytelling and messaging in the right way. Because up until that time, you just had, you know, you just had, you know, high-end brands occasionally doing their bit for charity in a kind of tokenistic way, depending on the PR opportunity. Or you had charities doing really badly designed in poor quality t-shirts and merch that people would sometimes buy because they felt guilty, but not because they thought that it was cool, or because they'd really wear it. And from day one, we managed to slice right down the middle with Bottletop and actually, just design cool things that people wanted to own and wear. And then in doing so, they became actually, kind of involved in why it had been designed and what it had been designed for, and the mission and purpose. And gradually people would start to become ambassadors for gender equality, for poverty alleviation, for recycling. And that was our kind of journey of learning.
Yeah. And I think it's a really interesting, this to me is a really interesting kind of concept, this idea of like gradually getting people to understand their consumer choices. And I mentioned I spoke to Ben Pundle last week, and he kind of had said, he was talking about with the Edition hotels how they've always said, we try to do our best without hitting people over the head with it. We're trying to be as sustainable as possible without like shoving it down their throats. And I kind of want to ask you the same question I asked him, which is, given where we are now with the state of the world, given that probably since 2002, in a lot of ways things have gotten better, but in a lot of ways they've gotten probably a lot worse as well. Do we need to start getting people, like, does the messaging need to be harder? Like, do we need to get people to be more engaged? Like, does the language need to not be as soft? It's something we talk about all the time at the REV office is, how much is too much and how much is not enough. And I'd be so curious what you think after 18 years in terms of people's ability to digest information and change, and as businesses, how far we should be going with that.
I think it's a fascinating question, and it's one that similarly we continually ask ourselves, and it's one where the answer, I think, has changed over time and has evolved with the circumstances of the day. And for the answer to that question in our first 10 years, at least, if not more, was less is more, and actually letting the product do the talking, and then backing that up and unpacking the information in terms of the mission and why we do it that way, and what the impact of the materials are on people and planet, what the product creation journey is, and and who we're supporting in the favelas or through the education projects, and what that really means, because the fashion community and the bigger public that we were engaging weren't necessarily ready or wanting to have that heavy duty conversation about poverty or about climate. And so we knew that we would deliver on our mission to a larger audience if we empowered people to kind of learn for themselves and choose how much of they wanted to kind of dive into what we were doing and why we were doing it, and try to light that path as clearly and as sensitively and as sensibly as possible, but not force it on people, because a lot of people just want to buy a beautiful handbag and wear that and be proud of it, and that's cool. Like, we welcome, and that's probably the larger section of the populace. So again, I think it's if you're trying to, you've got to think about that answer in the context of, well, who are you talking to and how many people are you trying to reach? Yeah. And I think, unfortunately, for many years, people just switch off if they see a brand shouting and being aggressive with it. I think that's changing. It's always changing, but I think now that we're all so much more intimately involved with the fragility of climate, of the planet, and of the closer to understanding the impact of our day-to-day choices, that I think it's actually a moment where it's important to be direct with a consumer audience, and I think they respect that. Obviously there's different ways of doing it, but I think I think it's important to be very clear and transparent with customers. There's so much greenwashing going on, and I think I think it's really important as a brand that you're really telling consumers who you are, what you are, and why you exist. Because there's not really any space today, from my perspective, for brands that actually don't have a bigger purpose. You know, it's like, we don't need more stuff. We've got plenty of great stuff. So let's weed out those brands that aren't, you know, really serious about making sure that their impact on people and planet, or their other, you know, it might be that they exist for a completely different but equally awesome reason. You know, it might be that they're raising money for this or that, or that they're supporting a particular community of artisans or workers in a far-flung corner of the world. Let us really focus in on what the purpose is.
So that's another question I have. Do you think off the bat, because I think COVID is teaching us a lot about, I think as you sort of said, the fragility of humankind. You know, I think that we all sort of thought we were invincible before. I think we thought we were shrouded in tech and modern day living, and nothing really that bad could happen to us. And I believe that was a big problem with climate change. I just think that we thought we were above it, or, you know, that Mother Nature could never kick our ass because we would harness it or handle it somehow. And I guess it seems like this really important moment to make sure that businesses come out, you know, the businesses that should come out of this winning are winning, and the businesses that should come out are failing, or shouldn't come out are failing. But I guess, are you seeing that? Like, do you feel optimistic that COVID has taught us something as consumers, that it has taught us, you know, I don't know exactly what we're all meant to have learned from this, except I believe a lot more respect for nature, and hopefully a lot more consideration for every part of life. And I guess, are you feeling that to be true? Or do you think as soon as this is up, you know, we're all going to go back to crowding Oxford Street and going into Primark and, you know, buying stuff we don't need? Like, 'cause I'm very much on the fence of this.
Yeah, well, listen, I think that the good news, in a way, from the environment perspective and Mother Nature's perspective, is that until there's a vaccine, we can't just rush back, because I'm quite sure that we would if we could. You know, I think everyone, so many, you know, parties would be fighting to rush back to business as usual. And when you look historically at what has happened following not dissimilar periods of, you know, either following mass illness or whatever, unfortunately the impact of people rushing back after the hiatus has often outweighed the benefits of the hiatus on an environmental level. But doesn't look like that's going to be possible now. And so I'm quite optimistic about that, because I think the longer we have to really come to terms with how we should all be living, and, you know, the kinds of, you know, organizations that should matter in the new normal, or in the new world that we find ourselves in, you know, I just think it's got to be a good thing. You know, it's like weaning somebody off of that, you know, that addiction. You know, it's like, it takes time. And I think, you know, we all need really to reconnect with ourselves and with our immediate, you know, community. And that's what this is all about for me. You know, I mean, what's extraordinary is that we have this technology, this ability to all, you know, connect in such a, you know, space age kind of way, that means that the things do still keep, you know, ticking over and happening, and, you know, brands can still sell product online and so on. But yeah, I am optimistic, because I'm an optimistic person, and I wouldn't do what we do with Bottletop if I wasn't. And I think we've been, whilst the fashion industry has rightly been scrutinized for being the baddie that it is on so many levels, and has, you know, caused such destruction and oppression of women in supply chains, you know, around the world for decades, that, you know, we've been privileged to also see firsthand the positive impact that fashion can deliver, you know, in terms of livelihoods, in terms of pride and self-respect, in terms of dignity, in terms of education and knowledge and self-confidence and livelihoods that can support families and put food on the table. That, you know, that's why we are optimistic and why we believe that, you know, fashion can and must be a force for good. It's about us, you know, as consumers, really voting for the kind of future that we want to see and the kind of brands that we want to see leading that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I couldn't think of a better segue into this next, you know, sort of topic I want to come on to, which is the United Nations Development Goals, which you launched, you know, to support You Had Together band, always wearing mine.
Yes. So great to see. Thank you for representing.
Yeah, obviously, of course. But, you know, I really felt like, well, I guess, first of all, could you just give us a little bit of a brief introduction to the UN Development Goals for people who might not be so familiar with them? And then I want to speak to you just about a couple of them a little bit more specifically, but a bit more about what they are and what you're doing with Together Band to support them.
Sure. So the Sustainable Development Goals are, really a route map for a healthy planet. The target date for that route map is 2030. So it's often referred to as the 2030 Agenda. And as I say, they're also, you know, commonly referred to as the Global Goals. And they're an extension of the Millennium Development Goals, which went before. And they were announced by all, or approved, if you like, by all member nations of the United Nations in September 2015, and very much set out to eradicate poverty, address climate change, address inequality, and really support a future that is about peace and prosperity for all. And there's a lot of kind of synchronicity for us in how we ended up creating Together Band, and our sort of journey with it sort of happened to also begin at that time in September 2015. We were hosting a launch in New York during Fashion Week with an amazing contemporary artist that we were collaborating with called Wangeshi Mutu, who is one of the extraordinary contemporary artists from Africa, from Kenya. And we'd done a capsule collection of bags made by artisans in Kenya with a beautiful emblem of a butterfly on the bags that were all hand screen printed, and the wings of the butterfly with a map of Africa sort of inverted. And we were raising money for LGBTQ programs in Africa through the sale of these designs. And it was a really interesting fashion meets contemporary art design collaboration. And we invited one of the sort of we invited a number of senior people from the UN to the event. And Amina J. Mohammed joined us, and she was one of the special advisors to Ban Ki-moon, who was the Secretary General at the time. And she was just fascinated by this approach that we were taking of using fashion and contemporary art, in this case, to engage people in some pretty tough subject matter. You know, like we were working to raise money to support projects that were really, you know, on the front line of trying to protect, you know, gay and lesbian, trans people in Africa, where it's still illegal to be, you know, living as a gay person. And our approach has always been this kind of soft design-led approach that has been about design beautiful things that carry a powerful message. And Amina was fascinated by that, and so we went and sat down with her at the UN that week, and you know, she told us about the global goals, and she connected us with the UN Foundation, and the more we got to know about the goals, and I was given a pin badge with the logo of the global goals, which is a round kind of color spectrum. And what was one of the brilliant things that they had done was assign a colour to each and every one of the 17 global goals. And it was a very kind of, I don't know, it was a very beautiful pin badge, and the iconography is very, very, very sharp. It's very clean. So that resonated with me, and I guess made our lives easy, the fact that each global goal has a colour. And so we said, okay, great, let's do what we do. And ultimately, their invitation was, how can you help us to spread the word on a global level about the global goals, about the Sustainable Development Goals, with this approach that you have of using fashion and design and art and culture to engage people in these development issues. And so what we thought about was how, yeah, you know, that's what we do with our Bottletop family. People who buy our bags, oftentimes, majority of times, they're buying a sustainable bag for the first time, and very quickly they become amazing ambassadors for the issues that we're addressing and the mission that we have. And we've watched that, you know, thousands of times over the years. And so we said, okay, if we could apply that approach to the global goals, and really have millions of people around the world choosing the goals that matter to them personally, sharing why, telling their story, so it being about unpacking, an invitation to unpack why these things matter, then you're unlocking the storytelling, which people can relate to, they can connect with. You know, it's like everyone can connect with stories, but it's also been about sharing those stories and harnessing the immediacy of modern technology and digital media to really you know, kind of explode a conversation around the global goals. So that took us, the whole kind of concept of designing a band, and obviously friendship bracelets have always been a powerful transmitter of mission and stories, or a message. So for obvious reasons, we decided to choose and design a friendship band. And with the bands that we wanted to, again, bake the story of as many of the global goals as possible into the design. So I'm wearing a few of them here. I don't know if you can see them.
And they look fab.
For anyone who is new to Together Band, or what this is all about, so the bands, the clasp is obviously the silhouette of a ring pull from a can, which is one of our signature materials, but it's not made from aluminium. It's made from illegal firearm metal, so handguns and larger weaponry that has been pulled off of the streets in El Salvador and melted down. So that's illegal firearm metal.
And also quickly, Cam, because I remember when we gave a talk in Christmas time, I asked you this question. I wanted to ask it for like a wider audience. Will you ever run out of illegal firearms in terms of melting them down to create these little bits? Because, you know, is that a resource that you think will be running out anytime soon, or are there just?
I really hope so. I really hope so. If I would love for us to, ultimately with Bottletop, I would love for us to go out of business because there's no more mission accomplished. We can shut up shop. I would be so happy with that.
But for now, we've still got lots of guns to get rid of, unfortunately.
Now, El Salvador continues to be, one of the most violent places in the world, and we found an extraordinary Swedish NGO that was working within communities with young men, trying to rehabilitate them and get them out of, you know, frontline gang warfare. And they almost discovered that the melting down of the weaponry and involving these young men in that process was you know, a therapeutic process in and of itself. And then so they started doing it because it was just the right thing to do to help them to get guys off of the streets. And then they were like, well, actually, what are we going to do with this metal? So it's called Humanium, and it's you know, an award-winning material. And when we read about it, we just said, wow, that's just so powerful, so symbolic. We would love for that to be incorporated into the bands. And then the thread, and we have the minis as well. It's all the same materials, and then the thread is made from ocean plastic that's been collected from coastlines by hand in and around Costa Rica. And then the assembly is done by women who've been rescued from human trafficking, with 2 extraordinary NGOs that we work with in Kathmandu in Nepal. So the assembly of the bands is done in Nepal. And so we wanted to create a product that was really symbolic of as many of the global goals as possible, and had all of that story and richness built into the product, but also how do you really kind of catapult it and help people to find their voice around these issues, particularly if they're engaging with these big issues for the first time. And we said, okay, we have to give everybody a second band. We have to, invite people to share, their together band with somebody that's special for them, and in do so share that thing that they have chosen to represent and that they really care about. So with every together band, you get it's a pack of 2, and it's one for you to wear and one for you to share with someone you love.
So, I was going to ask you to talk about quite a few of the United Nations goals, but what I decided I want to ask you instead is there one that speaks the loudest to you in terms of, they're all, having looked at them a little bit more in depth before our conversation today, I tried to kind of hone in on a few that I thought were important for REV, but now speaking to you, is there one that you're sort of like, this to me is the one that is going to actually help all the others, or do you think they've all been kind of done in it? Because 14 it's sort of in a way a lot,
Yeah, well, there's even a few more. There's 17 in total,
yeah.
And goal number 14 is, I know that's why that was in your mind, is because that's relates to the ocean and its life below water. And so yeah, I mean the beauty of it is that we're talking about huge subjects, from goal number 1 being no poverty, which is obviously huge. Nearly half the world lives in poverty still today, which is absurd. And the fact that lack of food and water still kills thousands of people every day is just so wrong, with the advancements that we have in modern society. So obviously, reducing poverty is a fundamental one, and one that's always been key for us in terms of the economic empowerment that we set out to create in highly challenging communities through our work with Bottletop and Together Band. Education, which is goal number 4, is a really important one for me personally, because that's how I was inspired to do what we do. Young people, are the future, and they are the living, breathing embodiment of the future, and they are the ones who will be empowered or not to make change. And so education, I think, and the importance of opening up opportunities, so that people can evolve and live in healthy society and make the right empowered choices. And it's undeniable how learning benefits not just the individual but everyone. I think is a fundamental one, and actually that's coming up next in the Together Band campaign. We're going to be launching Goal 4 Quality Education on the 9th of June, so everyone stay tuned for that. Got some exciting things in store. Then I guess Goal 8 is also an important one in terms of decent work and economic growth, because it's all about the juggernaut that is economic growth as a force for good, but for everybody, not just a small select group. And I think that's such a powerful and important message. And that was a goal that we launched as part of the campaign this year during the World Economic Forum in Davos. One of our key ambassadors for that was the model Halima Arden. And that was, I think, a really powerful message about the importance of protecting labour rights and, ending modern slavery and child labor, and making sure that people are properly supported and protected, and that innovation and entrepreneurship is for the benefit of everybody, again, not just for the few. So decent work and economic growth, I think, is a key one.
Yeah, I feel like going back to that kind of number one with no poverty, and it's funny because you're touching upon all the ones I wanted to discuss anyway, but I feel like one of the biggest criticisms we get at Revolver is that it seems like sometimes it's a platform for the privileged, and I think that comes along with the price points of what it means to produce sustainable fashion, and it's something we're extremely aware of. Given the fact that, number one, to me, this idea of no poverty, I'm so aware of the fact that basically the developed world is pretty much responsible for the mess that we've gotten ourselves into, and the developing world is by far experiencing the most horrendous impacts of all of this climate change, waste, etc., etc. And I just kind of love to get your take on that, because you're somebody that has, I wouldn't say Bottletop is necessarily like super luxury, but it's not cheap, and how do you sort of deal with this idea of, whilst we're all talking about things like poverty and education and equality, also selling higher priced items, I guess?
Yeah, it's a really important point, and I think it's we're a good example of and one that should be scrutinized in terms of, why do your handbags cost 100 to 700 pounds, in the majority, and it's because that's what it costs to make them. It's like, when you're paying everyone properly, when you're treating the materials properly, you're using certified zero deforestation leather, which is more expensive. Your staff team are earning 45% more than the local average industry wage in Brazil. You're providing physiotherapy and health insurance for everybody. You're doing things right. That's what it costs. And yeah, not everybody can afford that, and I'm very aware of that. And we are always looking at, okay, how can we also introduce product that's more affordable? We do have things that people can buy from upwards of £30, and we'll increasingly be introducing lines of product where they're less labor intensive in the manufacturing. So, there's less labor cost tied up in it, and where the materials don't have to be treated in such a particular way that our signature ring pull bags do. People often mistakenly think that because they're made of a waste material that they should be cheap, but actually they're works of art. It's like, our bags are generally made of anything from 1,000 to 15,000 of the recycled ring pulls. Well, each one of those has to be touched probably 12 to 15 times as it goes through the cleaning process, the painting process, the weaving process, the finishing. So what we're crafting is the bag should actually be a lot more expensive. So I think, but as a society, because of fast fashion and that whole other business model having evolved, which is about doing things on a completely different scale, and therefore taking a very slim margin, means that we've come to or a lot of people have come to think that, oh well, why should things cost that much? We should be able to just spend £15 on a handbag, or and that's just not, somebody's paying the price for that, and it's it's oftentimes the people in the supply chain and the planet, in terms of the way that the materials that are used and the processes through which they've been developed. So yeah, I think when products are priced properly, factoring in the positive impact that they should be having in terms of the materials that have been sourced, and the hands that have been involved in the making, that's the only way that we should be looking at what's a fair price for a product. And we always make our lives harder by going to try to create products in parts of the world where there isn't necessarily, you know, or there probably there isn't. Let's rephrase that. Where there isn't an established factory network, you know, where things can be made cheaply. So we deliberately go to communities and parts of the world where they need help, where they need livelihood creation, where people are struggling, and there isn't necessarily a pre-existing skill set, you know. So we have to develop that. We have to invest time and energy, really skilling people up, supporting them, you know, not thrashing them and, you know, trying to get a product out at a price that is, you know, unsustainable. So it's about supporting people, nurturing the product development process. And yes, that takes longer. It's more complicated. But, you know, we've been working in Brazil now. Our journey transitioned over from East Africa to Brazil through music. We also have an album series, and we raise money through music and contemporary art for the health education projects that we support through the Bottletop Foundation. And we were working on a record in Brazil, and my business partner Ollie spotted a very cool bag made from the recycled ring pulls from drinks cans, and we picked up some, you know, bags that we found made with that technique, and everybody fell in love with them. So we went on to really develop our atelier and training program in the northeast of Brazil, in Bahia, in Salvador. And so that's where the majority of our collection now comes from. And we've been working there for the best part of 15 years. And, you know, we started with nothing, in a favela with some people who needed, you know, livelihoods desperately, with an availability of locally sourced recycled ring pulls that were collected by homeless guys, and we pay them per kilo. And gradually we've upskilled and elevated the whole production process. And we now have, you know, a beautiful atelier with a team of over 30 people on a full-time basis, making extraordinary design. But that's, you know, we've proven that it's possible to create highly technical design from scratch in places where there isn't an infrastructure for fashion or product. But that's, you know, that also requires investment, and it requires dedication, and that's all of that has to be ultimately borne in the cost of the product.
Yeah, well, thank you, because I think it's really important that we kind of, you know, I think it's hard sometimes. That's why I love the podcast so much, because it's hard to explain in a blip on Instagram or a short editorial piece why these things cost what they do and how much, you know, love and energy and passion go into them. So thank you, Cam. And I guess my final question for you to wrap things up was about what we were talking about earlier. And I think, you know, something that's keeping coming up in these conversations is just how in this moment of slowing down, we've all learned things about ourselves and about the future and the future we want to create. And we finally have the time to kind of consider things that maybe we didn't consider before. So I know that you're spending more time at home, I think, than you've said you have in 15 years in Brighton. And
yeah.
What are the things that you've, I guess, learned or taken up that you want to take with you into, you know, what hopefully eventually will be a post-COVID world?
Great question. Great question. And I think, yeah, for me, it's been a bit like being on retreat, actually, just getting to be home for this period. And we've been, very busy with Bottletop and Together Band, but just being in one place and not charging around has really been something that I've embraced. And for me, it's about the simple things. You know, it really has been about, you know, getting up and actually making the time to meditate. You know, for me, doing, you know, a proper meditation session every morning and getting me into my center, so that I can be the best that I can be in the day. You know, the most powerful with what we're doing, the most focused, but also the most relaxed. So that, you know, the things that the inevitable stresses and crises that unfold, you know, perhaps you're just slightly better able to you know, to deal with in a more loving way. And, you know I can be better, and I know that I can go further. And so that for me, personally, meditation has been a really important takeaway for me with this whole experience, which definitely is going to be continue to be an anchor for me. And I think there's a lot that anyone can benefit from that, whether if they do or don't do it already. And I've always enjoyed training. Physical exercise for me is another great way of me being kind of the best version of me that I can be. And so getting to take a bicycle out by the sea, as I did this morning for 10 miles, and just really do that is, I think, our own health. And I went vegetarian at the start of the year, and so that's been a whole journey for me. It's been really amazing to kind of explore being vegetarian, actually being in one place where I can really take a moment to think, okay, what am I going to cook, and how am I going to do it, and what, where do I go with that? And so I've loved learning some vegetarian recipes. One of our ambassadors for good health and well-being is the wonderful Melissa Hemsley. So I've been deep in her book that she very kindly gave me, and I managed to get hold of just before we closed the office. And so I've been giving that a workout, and
get below, because I have also been taking advantage of Melissa's recipes.
Brilliant. Melissa Hemsley also is amazing. And Anna Jones, very good as well.
Oh my God, Anna Jones, all the cookbooks. But did you go veggie because of environmental reasons or ethical reasons, or what was the? I
think all. Yeah, I think all reasons really. I think I just found myself, don't get me wrong, I love a steak. I love seafood. But when you engage with the data as it is, it's like, it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable. We cannot expect to keep living in an abundant world, an abundant natural world, whilst we continue to outstrip its resources. And it's the beginning of it and the end of it. And so I think I was finding it increasingly difficult to kind of rationalize my own position in that, just because I love to eat meat and fish. So that was, and I can go further. I think eggs is the one thing that I'm still struggling to not feature in my diet. I think otherwise, yes,
I'm vegetarian. It's my one.
So I'm probably vegan in all other ways, but eggs, that's a tricky one. But I mean, we can all. I think that's the thing. At this time, we've all got to face up to the situation that we're in, and decide where we're gonna draw certain lines and what matters to us. That's a new adventure for me, and I've got to say, again, for anyone considering it, I mean, I'm loving it. Like, I've really not missed it. I had one foray while I was in Brazil during Carnival, and a launch that we were doing there, where I had a steak with a friend. I was really looking forward to it, and I had it, and it just didn't really sit with me. Like, it was just like, I'm not vibing with this, which I hadn't expected at all. I was going to be like, this is going to be the thing. So really interesting.
Literally, I lived in Paris for 6 years, and I used to eat at the steak restaurant in Paris, and I'd gone vegetarian, and I said, the next time I'm in Paris, I'm going to treat myself and have a steak at l'entrecôte, and I couldn't finish it. Like, I couldn't even
really?
eat it. I gave the rest to my husband. I was like, I can't. And it's so weird. It's like, and the fact that our bodies kind of reject it so quickly is interesting to me, if you know what I mean.
Very interesting. Yeah, it is. It's quite a bizarre experience. But maybe there's something in it.
Amazing. All right. Well, Cam, thank you so much. This has just been awesome, and I can't wait to share it with everybody. And I'm going to put some links below of the things that you discussed. And obviously, you know, we'll do something to help support with the education bit, because I think that to me is just so important.
Yeah, it's a big one. Obviously, at the moment, you know, everyone's suddenly, you know, all of those mums and dads who are homeschooling, and everybody who is grappling with education under their noses at the moment in such a different way. I think everyone suddenly has a slightly different perspective on what it means, and you know what is it that we should be teaching our kids, you know, and how, and you know, what's right about the education systems that we're either lucky enough to have or not. But I think it's a moment to show solidarity for everyone who is, you know, wrestling with that in different ways, and to try and provide support. So we're launching it on the 9th in sync with the world's largest lesson, which is a project between Project Everyone, which is the kind of the squad behind the global goals, pushing to raise awareness, and UNICEF. And it's all about sharing the global goals with teachers and young people. So some of our ambassadors are also taking part in that, and it's a great thing. So we wanted to rally behind that and help celebrate the importance of education.
Yes. All right. Well, look, we'll make sure we bring it to the REV Envers community. So thank you again, and you know, enjoy your meditating and your veggie meals. Oh my God.